My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was rinsing out a stubborn coffee filter. Unknown local number. I answered with a towel over my shoulder. Aaron, it's Janet. No, hello. My sister prefers conclusions to manners. Her voice was stiff, like she'd practiced in the mirror. What's up? I said. About the wedding, she said. It's better if you don't attend. I thought I misheard. Come again? Please don't come. A beat. Then she rushed it. You're too scarred for the photos. It's going to be very elegant. High society. We can't risk. Risk what, Janet? Embarrassing the family. Silence landed between us. I looked at the pale line on my knuckles and the small patch near my collarbone that never tans right. Everything else works fine. I can ruck all day and move a sofa alone. But a photo lasts forever. And apparently that's the real war. So I don't match your color palette, I said. That's not what I said. Don't twist my words. 1. You literally said, too scarred. She lowered her voice, like the hydrangeas might eavesdrop. There will be donors and clients. The photographer is top tier. The photos may get pitched to magazines. The church is strict. The dress code is formal. You know how you are. No makeup. Those boots. You stand like a soldier in every shot. I stand upright, sorry. Please don't make this harder. You're independent. You hate crowds. This is better for everyone. Everyone meaning you. It's not personal. Feels specific. I'm trying to spare you, she said. People whisper. I can't control that. You can control basic decency. Don't be dramatic, she said, the Whitman family slogan. You could come to the reception after the formal photos. Late. Nobody would judge. Except the people who already judged. She tried a softer pitch. Mom and Dad would want peace. Mom and Dad wanted plenty they didn't get. End of 4. Janet went quiet, probably counting to 10 like her therapist taught her. This is my child's wedding. I need everything perfect. Please respect that. And me? You'll be fine. You've always been tough. I leaned on the counter and stared at the magnet that holds my spare key. Tough is what people call you when they want your silence. I pictured our last brunch at a place that charges extra to toast bread. The hostess looked for someone richer to seat first. Janet called it the problem with service in this town. I let it slide. I wasn't in the mood to slide today. Okay, I said. I hear you. Relief crept in. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. I didn't say I understand, I said I hear you. She bristled. Don't make this a fight, it's a decision we've made as a family. We? Me and Greg. And Chloe, obviously. Your husband, your daughter. Got it. And others, she added, vague on purpose. Anyway, we'll send you the link to watch the live stream. The church offers it. Technology is amazing. Sure, I said. Miracles every day. She took it as agreement. Great. We'll have someone drop off a favor bag so you don't feel left out. The monogrammed candles are adorable. Can't wait to smell my exclusion. Aaron, anything else? A beat. If you do come near the church, please don't make a scene. I'm serious. I laughed once, flat. That would be your department. She hung up without goodbye. I stood there with the phone in my hand until the screen went dark. The kitchen clock ticked. A garbage truck squealed past outside. Life did what it always does. It kept going. I opened the drawer with rubber bands, stamps, and a challenge coin that isn't legal tender but buys me perspective. The coin felt cool under my thumb. I set it down, dumped the coffee, started a fresh pot I knew I wouldn't drink, and waited for anger. It arrived late, steady, and warm. I wasn't surprised she thought it. I was surprised she said it out loud. We grew up in a house where image mattered. Picture day was a sport. Christmas cards were staged like ads. When I joined the National Guard, Janet called it my phase. 2 deployments later, it became her lifestyle in the holiday letter. Soldier never made the cut. I texted Linda, the only person who doesn't do polite denial. You free? She replied instantly. Always. Who we buryin'? No one, I wrote. Yet. She sent. Coffee at my shop in an hour? Yes. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud. Saying them would pour concrete on them. I washed my face, dabbed concealer along the line near my jaw out of habit, pulled on a clean shirt, and looked at my boots, the ones Janet hates. Scuffed, dependable. I laced them up. On the fridge, cheap magnets held snapshots. My platoon at a cookout, me and Linda covered in dust after a field exercise, my parents on lawn chairs watching fireworks years before time did its usual work. No photo of me and Janet. I noticed that for the first time. The sky was clean Iowa blue. I locked the door, got in my truck, and drove past the park where weekend soccer happens. 3 Subarus and a golden retriever. Davenport doing Davenport. At a red light, my phone buzzed. Calendar reminder. Wedding rehearsal, Friday, 5 p.m. I'd set it months ago because that's what you do when you care. I changed the alert to none and put the phone face down. Linda's garage smelled like oil and old coffee. She looked up from under a hood, wiped her hands, and waited. No hug, no pity, just, what did she do? I gave her the short version. She let the facts stack up. You okay? She asked. I'm upright. Not the question. I'll live. She nodded at the office. Real coffee. And end of We sat on mismatched chairs while the bay door rattled up and down. She poured coffee into paper cups that said thank you in 6 fonts. She's always chased approval, Linda said. But this? It's not new. It's louder. What do you want to do? I'll figure it out. That's not a plan. It's a start. You going to shout? Post a speech online? Have you met me? She smiled. Right. You'll do something that works. I'll do something that fits, I said. She raised her cup. To fitting. We clinked paper. The coffee was finally strong. Back home, I left my phone on the table and skipped the doom scroll. I opened the back door and stepped into my small yard. The grass needed mowing. The sun felt honest. A neighbor waved. I waved back. Nothing about me looked like a crisis. Inside, I pulled a legal pad and wrote a line at the top in block letters I learned long before Janet discovered calligraphy menus. What I will and won't accept. Under it, I drew 2 columns and picked up my pen. I pressed the pen so hard the tip tore the paper, and the sound dragged me back further than I expected. The smell of ink mixed with the faint hum of the refrigerator was enough to stir up old snapshots I hadn't thought about in years. Janet always got the front seat. That's where it began. On family trips, she sat up front with Mom, chatting about haircuts, outfits, pageant winners. I sat in the back with a lunchbox and a comic book, learning how to be quiet. She was the chosen one, and I was the one who carried groceries without being asked. She got a camera for her 13th birthday. I got a pocket knife. When she won Homecoming Queen, my job was to hold Mom's purse in the bleachers. Our parents thought it was balance, one girl shining, the other steady. They never understood that steady turns into invisible real fast. By high school graduation, Janet had 3 scholarships lined up and a boyfriend with a convertible. I had a National Guard recruiter who promised college money, health care, and the chance to serve. My parents smiled politely at the recruiter, then beamed when Janet's boyfriend revved the engine loud enough to set off alarms in the parking lot. The day I swore in, Janet told me, "Don't get shot." She said it the way other people say. "Don't be late." I kept. Basic training was mud, sweat, and yelling that could strip paint. It also felt like the first time I belonged somewhere. Nobody cared if I wore boots every day. Everyone wore boots. We got measured by miles run in push-ups, not eyeshadow palettes. I learned how to stand straight, shoot straight, and think fast. Deployment came quicker than I expected. Iraq, then Afghanistan. The heat was like walking inside an oven, and the dust never washed off. I sent letters home on thin stationery that smelled like jet fuel by the time it reached Iowa. Mom wrote back with recipes. Dad sent clippings about local football scores. Janet didn't write. She did call once, the day after I wired money for her car payment. "Got it," she said. "Thanks. You're a lifesaver." "No problem. How's Chloe?" "Great. Ballet recital next week. Wish I could be there." "Yeah. Anyway, gotta run. Love you." Click. That was family support in a nutshell. I gave, they took, and Janet smiled for the camera while I shouldered the desert. The scars came from a roadside bomb that didn't quite finish the job. We were escorting a convoy near Kandahar when the explosion lifted the front end of our vehicle like a toy. My right side caught shrapnel. The medic patched me fast, said I was lucky. I spent 6 weeks in Landstuhl, then back in the States for rehab. Janet visited once. wearing sunglasses bigger than her face. She brought a gift bag with lotion and a scarf. To hide the mark, she whispered, handing me the scarf like it was contraband. I'm fine, I said. I know. But people stare. You should try to. You know. No, I don't know. She didn't stay long. Parking was expensive, she said. When I came home for good, Davenport felt smaller. I rented a duplex using a VA loan, fixed it up, and started a routine. Civilian contracting brought decent paychecks. I put money away instead of buying toys. I didn't want to depend on anyone ever again. Meanwhile, Janet climbed the social ladder. She threw charity galas, hosted book clubs where no one read the book, and mastered the art of the perfect Instagram smile. She liked to mention she had a sister in the service when it impressed her crowd, but at family dinners she shifted the spotlight back to herself before dessert hit the table. When Chloe graduated high school, Janet insisted on a catered event with white tents and a string quartet. I offered to help set up chairs. Janet waved me off. We have people for that, she said. I stood near the fence line with a paper plate of fruit salad, listening to her brag about the college Chloe had chosen. No one asked where I'd been or what I'd seen. Nobody wanted war stories in a backyard with champagne flutes. The contrast was clear. Janet collected compliments, I collected pay stubs and scars. She got to be glamorous, I got to be useful. And now she decided I wasn't even useful anymore, just a liability to her perfect pictures. I thought about all the checks I'd sent over the years. Rent when she and Greg fought about money. Tuition when Chloe needed summer courses. Babysitting unpaid because you're so good with kids. Every time I told myself, family comes first. Apparently, family only counts when it makes them look good. I gripped the pen tighter and wrote under the first column, will not accept, being erased. The words looked heavier than ink. They carried deployments, missed birthdays, months of sandstorms, nights of keeping guard while others slept. The coffee on the table had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Bitter works fine. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a thin folder I kept tucked behind old manuals. Inside were photos from my first deployment. Me and the unit lined up in desert camo, smiling like idiots before we knew what was coming. I traced the edges of the photo, remembering voices that never made it back home. Some of them were younger than Chloe is now. Those faces never made magazine spreads either. Nobody asked them to. The folder slipped from my hands and landed open on the floor. A photo of me and Ramirez at a forward operating base stared up, his grin wide, my helmet tilted crooked. He'd taken the blast head-on 6 months later. His parents never told him he was too scarred for family photos. They buried him with full honors. I put the folder back, careful this time. Standing in my living room, I could still hear Janet's voice saying, "Please don't come." It sounded less like a request and more like a verdict. She had judged me unfit for her version of reality. Fine. If she wanted me invisible, she was about to learn that invisibility has its own power. I tore the top page from the legal pad and pinned it to the fridge with the challenge coin magnet. Then I picked up the pen again, steady hand, steady ink, ready for the next column. The legal pad sat on the counter with half a page filled in block letters, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. I tried lying down, but my mind kept sprinting like it was back on patrol. The digital clock glowed 1:17 a.m. I kicked the blanket off and sat up. The air in my bedroom felt heavy, so I went back to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand shook just enough that a few drops landed on the counter. I stared at them, tiny puddles that wouldn't matter to anyone else, and thought about every time I'd let something slide for the sake of family peace. Small insults, brushed off. Small sacrifices, unnoticed. They had stacked up like sandbags until I was living behind a wall I hadn't chosen. I opened the fridge, grabbed the bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving since last Memorial Day, and didn't bother with a glass. The first swallow burned, the second dulled it. The room was too quiet. I pulled out an old shoebox of photos, the kind you keep meaning to organize. Pictures of Janet's holidays, Chloe's birthdays, family dinners where my seat was always at the corner. In most of them, I was either cropped halfway out or blurred in the background. Janet and Greg took center stage, smiling like cover models. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I flipped to the last photo of me in uniform at the airport, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. My parents looked proud but worried. Janet wasn't there. She had other plans. That was the story then, and it hadn't changed since. I pushed the box away and reached for the wedding invitation pinned to the fridge. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering, formal to the point of parody. My name was printed neat and clear, Miss Erin Walker. As if the paper itself believed I belonged. I pulled it down, stared at it, and ripped it in half. Then in half again. By the time I stopped, my hands were full of confetti that cost more than a week's groceries. The paper crumbled into the trash with a sound that was louder than it should have been. It felt good, too good, like the first deep breath after holding it too long. I leaned back against the counter and laughed once, sharp and bitter. If Janet thought she'd won by excluding me, she was wrong. She'd started something she couldn't control. The anger sharpened my focus. I walked to the bedroom, pulled the duffel from under the bed, and dumped it on the floor. Inside were odds and ends, spare uniforms, boots, a folded flag from Ramirez's funeral. I set the flag aside carefully, then dug for a folder I hadn't opened in years. Bank statements, VA loan paperwork, deeds, my insurance policy. I stacked everything on the kitchen table and sat down with a pen. Numbers didn't lie, and mine were better than anyone guessed. My duplex had doubled in value since I bought it. My 401 kelvins from the contracting job had grown quietly while I lived like I was broke. I had savings, bonds, even the small inheritance from mom and dad that Janet never knew existed. Janet thought I lived paycheck to paycheck. She had no clue that the scarred sister she wanted to erase was worth more than her precious social calendar. The realization didn't make me smug. It made me steady. For years I'd thought money was just security, a safety net. Now I saw it for what it could be. Leverage. A weapon that didn't require bullets. I scribbled notes. Will. Beneficiaries. Charitable options. The letters blurred as the wine spread warmth through my chest, but the anger kept me sharp enough. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and stared at my reflection on the screen. The scar across my jaw stood out under the harsh kitchen light. I tilted my head. Not ugly, not broken. Just a mark that said I'd lived through something. The phone slipped a little in my hand, but I steadied it and took a photo anyway. Proof. My fingers hovered over Janet's number, but I didn't call. She wouldn't listen, and I wasn't ready to waste words. She'd learn in her own way. The clock hit 3:40 a.m. The bottle was nearly empty, and the anger had settled into something colder, calmer. I cleaned the table, stacked the documents into a neat pile, and slid them back into the duffel. Not hiding, just waiting. I walked outside onto the porch. The neighborhood was silent except for a train horn far in the distance. The sky was dark, but the first edge of dawn was already pushing against it. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and sat in the chair I'd fixed last summer. The wood creaked, but it held. My breath fogged in the air, steady, controlled. I wasn't going to be erased. Not by Janet, not by anyone. The scar on my jaw itched in the cold, a reminder of what I'd already survived. I ran a hand over it, then over the calluses on my palm. They didn't tell the story of someone fragile. They told the story of someone who could take a hit and keep standing. Inside, the legal pad still waited with its columns half filled. My pen was ready. The morning light cut through the blinds when I finally dragged myself back inside. My head pounded from the wine, but my focus was sharp. I pulled the duffel onto the kitchen table and spread everything out like a field kit. Deeds, loan documents, account statements, all the quiet evidence of a life Janet had written off as pitiful. The first folder held the VA loan paperwork from when I bought the duplex 8 years ago. I'd scraped together the down payment with hazard pay from Afghanistan. The neighborhood wasn't glamorous, but I saw the potential. Now both units were rented, covering the mortgage and then some. Zillow said it had doubled in value. I'd kept the place patched up myself, fixing leaks, repainting, mowing the lawn on weekends while my tenants waved. Not flashy, but steady. Next came the 401 kelvins. Civilian contracting after deployment had its perks. Long hours, sure, but solid pay. I didn't buy luxury cars or vacations. I put the money where it grew. Boring index funds that multiplied quietly while Janet hosted wine tastings with overpriced cheese. The balance was over 300,000 now, numbers that looked unreal compared to the secondhand furniture in my living room. My savings account showed another 120,000. Add in bonds, a modest IRA, and the small inheritance from mom and dad that I'd never touched, and the total crossed the line into nearly $1 million. I stared at the number, the sum of discipline and sacrifice, and felt a calm satisfaction. Janet thought I was the embarrassing sibling with scars and no style. She had no clue that the failure she tried to erase had built more security than her manicured social life ever could. I shuffled the papers into piles and thought about how many times I'd stepped in for her. The car payment, the tuition check, the babysitting that saved her childcare bills. I never called it a loan, but I kept track in my head. She owed me more than money. She owed me honesty, gratitude, basic respect. Instead, she'd erased me from a family milestone because she didn't like how I looked in pictures. The anger was still there, steady and hot, but underneath it was something clearer. Power. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to beg for a seat at her table. I could flip the table over. I dug through the duffel until I found an old manila envelope with my current will. I unfolded it and skimmed. Everything went to family Janet by name. Then Chloe, if Janet predeceased me. I'd written it years ago when I still believed blood meant loyalty. The words on the page looked pathetic now. I couldn't stomach the thought of Janet or Greg cashing checks from my life's work. They didn't deserve a dime of it. I grabbed the legal pad and scrawled, "New will." Underneath, I wrote 3 names. The first was a veterans nonprofit I'd donated to once, the Gold Star Families and Military Spouses Foundation. They helped widows and kids who had given more than anyone asked. People who understood what sacrifice meant, not people who staged it for Instagram. The second was Linda. She'd never ask, but she'd been there every time I needed backup. If anyone deserved a slice of the security I'd built, it was her. The third slot I left blank. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted time to decide. I set the pen down and leaned back in the chair. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome. For years, I'd lived like a background character in my own story. Janet was the star, and I was the reliable understudy. Now the script was mine. My phone buzzed with a text. Janet again. Reminder. Rehearsal dinner Friday. We'll send you the live stream link. She hadn't even noticed I'd stopped replying. I typed out 3 words I won't watch, then deleted them. Not worth it. She'd know soon enough. Instead, I opened the contacts list and found Richard Callahan's office. He was the lawyer who helped me close on the duplex. Straightforward, not flashy. Exactly what I needed. I wrote his number on the pad under New Will. Tomorrow I'd call. The pile of papers still covered the table. Deeds, statements, receipts, proof that I wasn't who Janet decided I was. I gathered them into neat stacks and clipped them tight. The fridge hummed in the background, the only sound in the house. I pulled the old invitation pieces from the trash and dumped them into the fireplace. They curled and blackened quick, leaving nothing but gray ash. I grabbed a fresh folder and labeled it in thick black marker. Real life. I slid all the documents inside and placed it on the counter where I'd see it every morning. Not hidden anymore. Not buried under sweaters or stashed in a shoebox. Out in the open, like me. The weight of the folder was solid, grounding. I pressed my palm against it, steady and sure, then reached for the phone again. The folder sat on the counter all night, like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. By the time morning rolled around, I'd already brewed strong coffee, showered, and put on a pressed shirt. This wasn't a day for sweatpants. If I was going to walk into an attorney's office and rewrite my entire legacy, I wanted to look sharp, not like the invisible sibling Janet had always branded me. I dialed Richard Callahan's office just after they opened. The receptionist answered, crisp and polite. "Callahan and Price, how may I direct your call?" "This is Erin Walker," I said evenly. "I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Callahan regarding my will." She typed something in the background. "Earliest opening is Thursday at 2. Does that work?" "Perfect." That gave me 2 days to get my head straight and my documents organized. Put me down. When I hung up, a strange mix of nerves and adrenaline set in. I'd made decisions under fire before, real ones, where hesitation could get people killed. This was different but somehow carried the same weight. It wasn't bullets or IEDs, it was bloodlines and betrayal. I stacked the folder neatly into my rucksack and drove downtown. Richard's office was in a modest brick building, wedged between a dentist and a bail bondsman. Inside, though, it smelled like leather and old money. Framed law degrees lined the wall. He greeted me with the same firm handshake I remembered from the duplex closing. "Aaron," he said, motioning me toward a heavy oak chair. "Haven't seen you in years. What brings you back?" I didn't waste time. "I need a new will. Complete rewrite. Ironclad. No room for challenges." His eyebrows lifted. "That's serious. Who's getting cut out?" "My sister, Janet, and her family," I said flatly. "They're not to receive a dime." He didn't flinch, just leaned back and folded his hands. "You'll need to explain why. Courts don't look kindly on disinheriting immediate family, especially if they push back. You'll want airtight documentation." "I can explain," I said, and I did. I laid out the whole thing: the wedding snub, the insults about appearances, the years of financial and emotional drain, the sacrifices they'd never acknowledged. Richard listened, expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded. "You've thought this through. Let's talk beneficiaries." I slid the pad across the desk with the 3 names scribbled down: Gold Star Families and Military Spouses Foundation, Linda Mitchell. And one more, undecided. Charities are straightforward. Friends too, if you want. I'll draft it clean. He paused. "But I recommend recording a statement on video, explaining in your own words why you're making these choices. That way, if Janet tries to contest, we can show a judge exactly what was on your mind." "I'll do it." We spent the next hour reviewing language, percentages, and contingencies. Richard's pen scratched across yellow legal pads while his assistant brought in forms. My old will, the one that left everything to family, looked like a relic, a gullible fantasy written by someone who still believed respect could be bought with sacrifice. By the end, the blueprint was set. Janet would get nothing. Chloe wouldn't inherit a penny of the life I'd built. Instead, my assets would funnel into people and causes that actually mattered. Richard gathered the papers into a neat pile. "Come back Thursday afternoon. We'll finalize, sign, and record your statement. After that, it's done." I stood, shook his hand, and walked out feeling taller. The air outside was cool, but I felt heat in my chest. Not the sharp sting of betrayal anymore, but the steady burn of control. On the drive home, I thought about how this plan wasn't just financial. It was strategic, like prepping for deployment. You identified the mission, assessed resources, cut out liabilities, and secured your flanks. Janet thought she'd humiliated me into silence. Instead, she'd given me the trigger I needed to flip the board. Back at the house, I set the rucksack down and poured another coffee. The kitchen looked different somehow, less like a cage and more like a command post. I spread the documents out again, not to double-check numbers, but to savor the proof that every line of sacrifice, every dollar saved, had built leverage. Janet wanted me erased from her perfect photos. She'd get her wish in a way she never expected. When she looked back years from now, she wouldn't see me in her wedding pictures, but she'd remember the envelope I'd placed in her hand, the one that turned her victory party into a cautionary tale. I flipped open a notebook and began drafting the letter I'd have delivered with the will. The words came fast, sharper than I planned. I told her she'd underestimated me, that she'd mistaken silence for weakness. That money wasn't my weapon, but it made for a damn effective reminder of who she had cast aside. Halfway down the page, I stopped, smirked, and scratched it out. Too bitter. This wasn't about trading insults, it was about truth. Revenge worked best when it was undeniable, when the facts alone did the cutting. So I started again. I wrote about every deployment, the years she never visited, the checks I sent home while she spent on clothes. I wrote about standing outside her fancy fundraisers, feeling like an outsider even as the one who had helped fund her lifestyle. Then I ended with a line that felt perfect. Honor isn't a dress code. It's how you treat people who stood by you when nobody else would. The pen pressed hard into the paper, almost tearing it. I sat back, exhaled slow, and felt lighter. The folder was ready, the will was in motion, the letter was written. All that was left was timing. I wanted her to smile, to think she'd erased me, and then feel the floor drop out beneath her. The thought of it didn't just calm me, it made me grin. I opened the closet and stared at the lineup of uniforms, jackets, and jeans. For once, none of them would do. If I was going to walk into that wedding, I needed something that would let me blend in just enough. but still carry the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Not a soldier's uniform, not my daily work clothes, and definitely not the plain cousin outfit Janet probably pictured me in. The boutique downtown wasn't my usual stop. I hadn't set foot in a high-end store in years, but the sales clerk, a young guy with slicked-back hair and too much cologne, acted like I belonged there the second I walked in. I found a simple navy sheath dress, tailored but not flashy, with a jacket that gave it structure. When I stepped into the fitting room and saw myself in the mirror, I almost laughed. The scars on my arm and the faint line across my cheek didn't disappear, but the outfit framed me differently. Less like forgotten sister, more like someone who came to claim her own space. I bought the dress, a pair of low heels, and even let the clerk talk me into a clutch bag. Walking out with the garment bag slung over my shoulder, I felt the same kind of readiness I used to feel packing gear for deployment. Different battlefield, same adrenaline. The hair appointment came next. Carmen, the stylist, had a warm smile that made me relax. "What's the occasion?" she asked while running her hands through my hair. "Family wedding," I said. I didn't elaborate. "Well, let's make them wish they treated you better," she winked, and I couldn't help but grin. She worked carefully, trimming, shaping, even adding a shine I hadn't seen in years. By the time she spun me around, I barely recognized myself. My reflection wasn't screaming for attention, but it demanded respect. At home that night, I laid everything out, the dress, the shoes, the bag, the folder, with the letter for Janet. I tested slipping the envelope into the clutch and practiced sliding it in and out without fumbling. It was a detail most people would overlook, but details win battles. Then came the speech. Not for anyone at the wedding, but for the camera Richard would set up when I signed the will. I rehearsed it out loud, pacing the living room. "My name is Erin Walker. I'm of sound mind and body. I am leaving my estate to organizations and people who understand the meaning of sacrifice and respect." The words grew sharper as I repeated them, but also steadier. By midnight, my house looked like a staging ground. Garment bag hanging by the door. Shoes polished. Letter sealed. Notes for the video statement stacked neatly. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, thinking about Iraq, about convoy briefings where you rehearsed every possible scenario. That's what this was now, planning for a controlled detonation at Janet's perfect wedding. 2 days later, Richard's office turned into a recording studio. A tripod, a camera, a blank backdrop. "Ready when you are," he said. I looked straight into the lens and delivered every word without flinching. I talked about years of service, years of sacrifice, the ways family could cut deeper than enemy fire. I said clearly that Janet had abandoned me when all I had done was stand by her. And then I finished with the line I'd practiced. "Honor isn't about how you look in photos. Honor is how you treat the people who had your back." Richard gave a small nod when I was done. "That's ironclad," he said. "No one can spin that." I signed the documents, sealed the letters, and walked out of that office with a sense of finality I hadn't felt since the day I left active duty. Back home, I placed the sealed envelope inside a silver frame box I'd picked up. From the outside, it looked like a thoughtful gift for the bride and groom's new home. Inside, it carried the one thing that would outlast their wedding photos: the truth. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. Not from nerves, but from clarity. Every detail was lined up. I wasn't storming into that church to make a scene. I wasn't going to shout or cry. My revenge would be quiet, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. When the morning came, I ironed the dress, polished the shoes again, and slipped the envelope into the lining of the gift wrap. The mirror reflected a woman who wasn't broken, wasn't forgotten, and sure as hell wasn't finished. By the time the taxi pulled up outside, everything was in place. The weapon wasn't in my hand, it was in the truth I was about to deliver. The taxi rolled through downtown Des Moines, past brick storefronts dressed up with bunting for spring, until it pulled in front of St. Andrew's Episcopal. The place looked like a postcard. Tall stone arches, stained glass that caught the morning light, and white flowers spilling out onto the steps. Janet had always dreamed of staging her daughter's wedding like a society event, and clearly she'd succeeded. I stepped out, clutching the wrapped silver frame with the hidden envelope tucked inside. The driver offered a polite nod. I straightened my jacket, adjusted the hem of my dress, and walked up those steps without a hitch in my stride. Inside, The air was thick with perfume, chatter, and the sound of a string quartet tuning up. Ushers in matching tuxedos guided guests to their seats. Families smiled, hugged, compared outfits. And me? I headed straight for the last row, the back bench, the one place nobody expected the embarrassing sister to show up. From there, I had a clear view of the entire sanctuary. White roses twined around every pew. Satin ribbons stretched like guardrails down the aisle. And in the front, 3 entire rows were reserved for Janet's husband's colleagues, donors, and extended in-laws. The mother of the bride sat polished and glowing in a silver gown, surrounded by cameras. Meanwhile, I was tucked into the shadows, exactly where they thought I belonged. I sat quietly, watching faces pass by. Some were familiar neighbors from our childhood street, old co-workers of my father, even a retired teacher who used to stop me in the grocery store. A few spotted me and waved politely, their expressions flickering with confusion. Why wasn't I up front with family? I smiled back, offering no explanation. Let them wonder. The music shifted, and the minister signaled the crowd to rise. Heads turned as the bride appeared, a vision in lace, gliding down the aisle on her father's arm. She was beautiful, no doubt about it. Her smile broadcast perfection, her every step choreographed to meet the standards of an expensive photographer darting around the room. But I wasn't watching her. My eyes locked on Janet, sitting in the front pew like a queen presiding over her empire. She was radiant, smug, her chin slightly raised, basking in the glow of orchestrating the wedding of the year. She didn't look back toward the rows behind her. She didn't have to. In her mind, I was already erased. The ceremony unfolded with scripted vows, promises of loyalty, prayers for a future full of love and children. The minister spoke about family as if it was a sacred shield. I nearly laughed at the irony. For Janet, family was a weapon wielded to exclude, to control, to make her world spotless for appearances. When the couple kissed and the congregation erupted in applause, I clapped once, softly, then let my hands rest in my lap. My role wasn't to celebrate. My role was to wait. At the reception line in the church narthex, guests swarmed with congratulations and handshakes. I kept to the side until the rush thinned. Then I approached, holding the silver-wrapped frame. Chloe looked flawless up close, glowing in her gown, her new husband standing tall beside her. Janet lingered near them, intercepting guests with practiced warmth. When their eyes landed on me, I saw it the flicker of surprise, the tightening jaw, the brief panic. Janet masked it with a brittle smile, but I knew the look. She hadn't counted on me showing up at all. "Erin," she said, her voice just above a whisper, forced polite. "You made it." "Of course," I said, handing the box forward. "It's a gift for your new home." Chloe accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, Aunt Erin," she said graciously, though her eyes darted to Janet as if seeking permission. I leaned in to hug her, quick and proper, then shifted to Janet. For the briefest moment, our faces were inches apart. I slid the thin envelope into her hand with the kind of precision you learn in the military, quiet, seamless, impossible to fumble. She stiffened, her fingers tightening around the paper, and I whispered just for her, "This is from me. Read it when the crowd is gone." She froze, but the cameras were flashing, the guests were watching, and she had no choice but to keep her mask on. She tucked the envelope beneath her clutch and plastered on another smile. I stepped back, nodded politely, and turned toward the doors. My heels clicked against the stone floor as I walked out into the daylight. To anyone watching, I looked like any other guest heading home early. But I knew the truth. I had just placed a live grenade in Janet's perfect little world, and the pin was already out. The driver pulled up again, and I slipped into the back seat, calm as ever. Behind me, inside the church, the reception line continued, laughter and chatter covering the fuse that was burning quietly in Janet's hand. I didn't look back. There was no need. The taxi ride back to my house was quiet, only the hum of the engine filling the space. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my mind strangely calm. My part was finished. Now, it was just a matter of time. That evening, I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't touch the TV, didn't scroll my phone. I simply waited. Around 7, the first voicemail came through. By 9, I had 6 more. By midnight, My phone looked like it was under siege. I finally played them, one by one, listening with the same discipline I used to monitor comms on a headset overseas. "Aaron, what the hell was that?" Janet's voice was tight, brittle, the sound of someone fighting to keep her composure. "You show up looking smug and hand me this? Do you realize what you've done?" The next message was harsher, Chloe's voice breaking through the static. "Aunt Erin, I don't know why you hate us, but you ruined my wedding. People are whispering, asking questions. Mom's in tears. I hope you're proud." Another voicemail, later that night, was pure rage. Janet didn't even bother with politeness. "You always had to find a way to make everything about you. Couldn't just let one day, my daughter's day, be perfect. You're pathetic, Aaron. You disgust me." I sat listening, each word sliding off like rain on a poncho. They were angry because I'd hit them where they lived. Image, reputation, control. The money was almost secondary. What cut deepest was realizing I wasn't the poor, pitiful sister they'd written out of their script. By morning, the storm had escalated. My voicemail counter maxed out. The last 3 messages had the edge of desperation. Chloe's voice cracked. "Please call me back. Mom won't stop yelling. Dad's furious. Everyone thinks we're liars. I don't understand what's happening." Another. "You won't get away with this. If you think some letter and some lawyer can erase family, you're wrong. We'll contest it." And finally, from Janet, her voice hoarse from shouting, "You've destroyed us. Do you hear me? You've destroyed this family. I will never forgive you." I leaned back, letting the phone rest on the table. Destroyed the family? No. I'd simply stopped being their doormat. If that felt like destruction to her, then it said more about how fragile her kingdom really was. Later that afternoon, I ran into a neighbor at the grocery store. She gave me a look I knew well, the look people give when they've heard something scandalous but aren't sure if they should bring it up. "Busy weekend?" she asked lightly, tossing apples into a bag. "Very," I said deadpan. Her lips pursed. "I heard the Whitman wedding was dramatic." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Weddings usually are." She blinked, then laughed nervously and dropped the subject. Word was already spreading. The envelope had detonated exactly as planned. Back at home, I opened my laptop and checked my email. Sure enough, Richard had already sent confirmation that the will revisions were signed, sealed, and filed. He also attached a scanned copy of the video statement I'd recorded, just in case. I watched the first few minutes again, hearing my own voice steady and unflinching. Honor isn't about appearances. Honor is about loyalty, sacrifice, respect. I shut the file with a satisfied click. The calls kept coming through the night. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I poured myself a drink and sat out on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. Somewhere across town, Janet was likely pacing her immaculate kitchen, replaying my words, realizing she couldn't spin this away with charm or lies. Around midnight, one more message landed, shorter than the rest. Janet again, this time nearly whispering, "Why would you do this to us, Aaron? Why would you humiliate us like this?" I shook my head and set the phone face down. She still didn't get it. It wasn't humiliation. It was exposure. The difference mattered. The following morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. Coffee, a run down by the river, checking in with a friend from the guard on Facebook. Normal life, except now I carried the knowledge that the balance had shifted permanently. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to fight with Janet on the phone. The war was already over, and for the first time in years, I was the one who had walked away with the upper hand. The knock on my front door rattled the glass. Not polite, not tentative angry. I didn't even bother peeking through the blinds. I already knew who it was. I opened the door, and there she stood. Janet Whitman, my older sister, still in the same tailored suit she'd worn to the wedding rehearsal, though now her mascara was smudged and her hair looked like it had been clawed at. She shoved past me without waiting for an invitation, heels clicking hard against my floor. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped, spinning around in my living room. "Showing up like some ghost, handing me that little envelope in front of everyone. You humiliated us." I closed the door behind her slowly. "Coffee?" I asked, calm as a medic on base. "Don't you dare play coy," she barked. "You've ruined Chloe's marriage. Her husband's family is furious. They're threatening to pull out of the business deal his father was negotiating. Do you understand what you've cost us? What I cost you? I let the words hang in the air. Janet, for 30 years I gave and gave. Tuition money, babysitting, covering debts. And how did you repay me? By telling me I wasn't fit to be seen at your daughter's wedding. So, let's be honest, you cost yourself. Her face flushed. That wasn't my decision. It was about appearances. You know how people talk. Yes, I said evenly. I do know how people talk. I've heard it my entire life. But here's the difference. In the military, when someone bleeds beside you, nobody asks how it looks. They patch you up. They drag you out of the fire. They don't decide you're bad for the unit's image. They have your back. She faltered for half a second, then regrouped. This is different. This is family. We have standards. Family? I took a step closer. Family means showing up when it matters, not erasing someone because they don't fit your magazine spread. Family doesn't shove their own blood into a corner just to look good in photos. Her lips trembled, but her eyes stayed sharp. So your big revenge is cutting us out of your will? Giving everything to strangers? Do you think that makes you noble? They're not strangers, I said. Gold Star families, military spouses, they're the ones carrying the weight when the country forgets about us. They're the ones who understand sacrifice. They're the ones who actually need the support. Unlike you, who only ever needed me when your credit card's maxed out. Janet threw her hands up. So that's it. You're just erasing us. I shook my head. No, you erased me years ago. I'm just making it official. She stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting around my modest living room as if searching for something to latch onto, something that could prove I was still the weak little sister she'd kept under her thumb. But all she found were walls I'd painted myself, floors I'd refinished, photographs of fellow soldiers instead of family portraits. Finally, she dropped onto the couch, her shoulders slumping. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. Everything I've built depends on people believing we're the perfect family. The right house, the right friends, the right connections. You've destroyed that image. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Maybe stop worrying about the image and start worrying about being decent. People see through perfection eventually. All I did was speed it up. Adgore. Her eyes glistened, though I wasn't sure if it was anger or actual tears. I never thought you'd do this. You were always the reliable one. Always the one who would step aside, help out, stay quiet. I counted on that. That was your mistake, I said softly. You mistook loyalty for weakness. You thought because I wore the uniform, because I sacrificed, it meant I'd never stand up to you. But the truth is, I didn't fight overseas just to come home and let my own sister treat me like I don't matter. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Then she whispered, Can't we fix this? Can't we just undo it? I almost laughed. What exactly do you want me to undo, Janet? The years of disrespect? The phone call telling me not to come because I'd embarrass you? The way you pushed me out of every family milestone? Or do you just want me to undo the will so you can keep cashing in? She stood again, squaring her shoulders, her mask slipping back into place. You're making a mistake. One day you'll regret this. One day you'll wish you still had a family. I opened the front door wide. No, Janet. One day you'll wish you treated your family like family. That's the difference. She glared at me one last time, then stormed out, heels clattering against the porch, her car engine roaring to life as she sped down the street. The house was quiet again. I stood there, staring at the door she'd slammed behind her. My pulse was steady. My hands didn't shake. For once, I wasn't the one left in pieces after one of our fights. I walked back to the kitchen, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. The folder with my will documents still lay there, neat and final. I traced my finger across it, not out of doubt but out of certainty. The confrontation hadn't changed my mind. If anything, it had carved the truth deeper. Janet had always been about appearances. I was about survival. And in survival, only one thing mattered: who had your back when it counted. Janet never did. And now, she never would. The day after Janet stormed out, I pulled a stack of cardboard boxes from the garage. If she thought her meltdown would shake me back into line, she'd underestimated just how finished I really was. Every deployment I'd ever done taught me one thing. When the mission changes, you adapt fast. My mission now was leaving Iowa behind. I started in the kitchen. The cabinets held mismatched mugs, thrift store plates, and pots dented from years of use. I kept only what would fit in 2 plastic tubs and taped the rest shut. The walls looked bare without the little pieces of clutter I'd accumulated. But instead of sadness, I felt lighter. In the living room, I wrapped photo frames in newspaper. Most were military squad shots, base cookouts, a few medals in shadow boxes. The ones of family, I tossed into a separate box marked storage. I didn't want them gone, but I didn't need them staring at me every day either. My phone buzzed constantly on the counter. More missed calls, more voicemails. I didn't even glance at the screen anymore. It felt like cutting a wire on a piece of malfunctioning equipment clean necessary. By mid-afternoon, I loaded the first stack into my truck. The tailgate slammed shut with finality. Neighbors waved, some curious, some whispering. One older guy across the street asked, "Moving out?" "Something like that," I said, and kept walking. Inside, I tackled the closet. Uniforms went into garment bags. Civilian clothes into boxes. At the bottom, I found the old duffel I'd carried overseas, still stained with desert dust in the seams. I set it aside, not to pack, but to bring with me in the cab. That bag had been through enough with me that it deserved shotgun. Late that night, I sat on the floor surrounded by taped boxes. The house echoed when I spoke out loud, just to hear the sound. It didn't feel like home anymore, just a shell I'd borrowed until I found my real direction. The next morning, I called a realtor. She arrived in a navy blazer, eyes scanning the rooms with practiced detachment. "You've kept it in good shape," she said. "Houses in this neighborhood don't sit on the market long." "I want it sold fast," I replied. "Cash offer if possible. I don't care about squeezing every last dollar." She scribbled notes. "Shouldn't be a problem. The market's tight. I'll list it this week." As soon as she left, I walked from room to room one last time, flipping light switches, closing closet doors. When I reached the garden, I paused. Rows of tomatoes, roses climbing the fence. I'd put years into that soil, kneeling in the dirt after long shifts, pulling weeds, trimming branches. It should have felt like goodbye. Instead, it felt like handing off equipment to the next person on rotation. My job here was finished. I loaded the last box into the truck and slammed the door. The garage clicked shut behind me, sealing the chapter. With everything tied down, I stood in the driveway, looking at the house. White siding, green shutters, the porch where I'd drunk 1,000 cups of coffee. Janet had been in and out of this place only when she needed something. For her, it was just another backdrop in a life of appearances. For me, it had been a station, but even stations close eventually. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let it idle. My hands gripped the wheel loosely, not tense, just steady. Through the rearview mirror, the house framed itself smaller and smaller, a rectangle shrinking against the horizon of a flat Iowa street. At the stop sign, I hesitated. Not from doubt, just acknowledgement. The rear view showed me the life I was leaving behind. Ahead, the highway stretched wide open, running west toward Colorado Springs. Toward mountains, new air, and a community of veterans who understood more than family ever had. I pressed the gas. The truck rolled forward, leaving the house and Janet's world behind in the dust. The road stretched long and straight, farmland giving way to open plains. Radio static filled the cab until I found a country station. The lyrics didn't matter. The freedom did. With every mile marker, the weight lifted. By the time the Iowa state line faded in the mirror, I wasn't carrying boxes anymore. I was carrying a new mission, and this one was entirely mine. The drive west took me 2 days, with one overnight stop at a roadside motel in Nebraska. By the time the mountains rose in the distance, jagged and snow-capped under the morning sun, I felt like I'd shed 10 years off my shoulders. Colorado Springs spread out below, a mix of base housing, suburban neighborhoods, and streets lined with diners and breweries. It felt alive, but not in the suffocating way Iowa had become. I rented a small townhouse near Peterson Space Force Base, nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a balcony that overlooked the foothills. The first night, I sat outside with a beer, watching the city lights blink on and thought, this feels like a place to breathe. The next morning, I walked into the local Veterans Resource Center. A sign out front read, "You are not alone." Inside, the smell of coffee mixed with copier ink. A young guy at the desk, probably early 20s, looked up. "Here for services?" he asked. "Here to get involved," I said. Within an hour, I was sitting in a circle of folding chairs with 6 other vets. A retired Marine named Daryl cracked jokes between sips of black coffee. A Navy widow named Lisa spoke about raising 2 kids while balancing 3 jobs. An Army medic not much younger than me admitted she still woke up at 3 a.m., hearing rotor blades. When it came my turn, I simply said, "I'm Erin. Army National Guard, deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, just moved here from Iowa." Daryl grinned. "Welcome to the circus. You'll fit right in." The meeting rolled on with stories, updates, gripes about the VA. No judgment, no polished image, just raw honesty. It was the first room in years where I didn't feel invisible. Afterward, Lisa tapped me on the arm. "We're having a community dinner Friday night. You should come. No pressure, just food and people who get it." "I'll be there," I said without hesitation. Friday came, and I showed up to a modest hall decorated with paper banners and mismatched chairs. Kids ran between tables while volunteers ladled chili into bowls. Someone handed me a slice of cornbread and pointed me toward a group. Midway through the evening, the coordinator asked if anyone wanted to share words about resilience. Before I could think twice, my hand went up. I stood, the room quieting. "I spent years believing sacrifice was the same as loyalty," I began. "I thought giving until it hurt was the only way to prove love to family, to anyone. But what I learned is that sacrifice without respect is just exploitation. The military taught me that honor isn't about medals or titles. It's about who has your back. And sometimes, the only way to honor yourself is to stop standing where you're not valued." The room stayed silent for a beat, then broke into applause. Not polite applause, the kind that says, "We get it, we've been there too." Lisa squeezed my arm, eyes shining. That night, walking back to my truck, I realized I hadn't felt this steady in years. I wasn't an outsider here. I wasn't the embarrassing sister shoved to the back row. I was part of a unit again, one that accepted me exactly as I was. Over the next weeks, I dove deeper. I joined a hiking group of vets who hit the trails every Saturday. We laughed, cursed the inclines, and shared stories about deployment rations and barracks pranks. I helped organize a fundraiser for Gold Star families, watching kids of fallen soldiers race around the park while their parents finally relaxed for a few hours. Everywhere I went, people saw me not as a burden, not as a stain on someone's perfect photo album, but as a fellow traveler who understood the cost of service. One evening, after a long hike, Daryl leaned on his trekking poles and said, "You've got leadership in you. Ever think about running one of these groups?" I chuckled. "I just got here. Doesn't matter. You've got the presence. People listen when you talk. That's rare." The words stuck with me. For years, my voice had been drowned out by Janet's demands, by her version of what family should look like. Here, it actually mattered. I drove home that night with the windows down, cool mountain air rushing through the cab. For the first time in decades, the future didn't feel like a burden or a trap. It felt wide open. In the weeks that followed, I began sketching out plans not just for myself, but for how to put my resources to work here. The foundation I'd named in my will could start seeing donations now, not just when I was gone. I called Richard back in Iowa and had him set up a charitable trust, funneling part of my rental income toward veterans' housing projects in Colorado Springs. He sounded surprised. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Dead serious," I said. "Money's just paper unless it builds something worth leaving behind." Each step made me feel more rooted in my decision. I hadn't just left Iowa. I'd left the version of myself who accepted being sidelined, humiliated, diminished. Out here, in the shadow of the Rockies, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was leading a new mission. And every time I looked around a crowded veterans hall, every time a widow or a soldier nodded at me in quiet solidarity, I knew I was finally where I belonged. The invitation came on a crisp morning in May. A folded card slipped into my mailbox, marked with the seal of the Colorado Veterans Alliance. They were holding a Memorial Day ceremony at the city amphitheater, and I'd been asked to speak. Me, someone who had barely unpacked her life here. I stared at the card for a long minute, the weight of it settling in. For years, my voice hadn't mattered in Iowa. At Janet's table, at her events, in her version of family, I was furniture. Here, someone thought I had something worth saying out loud. I ironed my dress uniform the night before. The jacket still fit, though the fabric carried faint creases from deployments past. I polished the brass buttons until they gleamed and set my boots by the door. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who'd been cast aside for not fitting the aesthetic. I saw a soldier, a leader, someone who had carried weight most people never noticed. The amphitheater buzzed with people that morning, families holding small flags, veterans in wheelchairs, kids wearing oversized t-shirts with their father's unit insignias. The air smelled of grilled hot dogs and sun-warmed concrete. Rows of folding chairs stretched out under a blue sky that felt wide enough to swallow every doubt I'd ever carried. When they called my name, I stepped up to the podium. The microphone squeaked once, then went quiet. Faces turned toward me, some expectant, some curious, all waiting. I gripped the edges of the podium and began. I spent a long time confusing sacrifice with silence. I thought loyalty meant giving until nothing was left. But loyalty isn't letting yourself be erased. It isn't standing quietly while people treat you like a burden. Real loyalty is mutual. It's earned, shared, and respected. The crowd leaned in. Even the kids stilled. I gave 39 years of my life to people who never saw me. I fought for a family that only cared about appearances. And when they decided I wasn't good enough for their perfect picture, I realized something. Family isn't who shares your last name. Family is who stands beside you when you're down in the dirt, when you're bleeding, when the world forgets you. Family doesn't erase you. They fight with you, for you, no matter what. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. That's why I left Iowa. That's why I rewrote my will. I stopped investing in people who saw me as disposable and started investing in communities that know the meaning of sacrifice. Because honor isn't a dress code. Honor is how you treat the ones who had your back. Applause broke out, steady at first, then swelling into cheers. Veterans clapped hard, some raising their canes, kids waved their flags. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. When I stepped down, Lisa caught my arm. "You killed it," she said, smiling through tears. That was exactly what people needed to hear. I smiled back, feeling steady in a way I hadn't in years. Not bitter, not burning, just solid. Later, as the ceremony wound down, I walked toward the memorial wall. Names etched in stone lined the black granite. Gleaming under the sunday, I ran my fingers across one in particular, Staff Sergeant Miguel Torres, a friend who hadn't made it back from our second tour. "I made it out, Miguel," I whispered, "and I finally stopped letting people take pieces of me. I'm standing on my own now." The wind carried the faint sound of the honor guard folding the flag, the sharp crack of the rifle salute echoing against the mountains. I stood straighter, shoulders squared, the way I always had information. When I left the amphitheater, the sky stretched wide, the mountains steady on the horizon. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another voicemail from Janet I'd never bothered to open. For once, the sound didn't sting. It didn't matter. I climbed into my truck, rested my hands on the wheel, and took a deep breath. The engine rumbled to life, steady and sure. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about teaching Janet a lesson, or proving anything to Chloe, or rewriting every insult. It was about me, reclaiming the dignity they'd tried to strip away. I drove down the highway toward my townhouse, sunlight spilling over the hood, a new mission clear in my chest. Live with honor, choose my own family, and never again shrink to fit someone else's picture. For the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying someone else's weight. I was exactly where I belonged, and I was free. Looking back, it's almost funny how long I let myself believe that being a good sister meant being invisible. I bled for people who never once bothered to check if I was still standing. I gave until I had nothing left, and still they wanted more until the day they decided even my presence was an embarrassment. That was the breaking point, and thank God for it. Walking away wasn't losing family. It was finally understanding what family really island. Out here, among veterans and neighbors who don't care about appearances, I found more loyalty than I ever got from blood relatives. The truth is simple. The people who stand by you when the cameras are gone, that's your family. I don't regret the years I spent giving, because they taught me what not to settle for. And I don't regret leaving, because it gave me back myself. At the end of the day, I didn't just survive what they did to me. I rebuilt, I stood tall, and I made damn sure they'd never erase me again. That's the real story.